James Urban Ruppert entered the world on March 29, 1934, into a family dynamic that would irrevocably shape his destiny. In the working-class environment of Hamilton, Ohio, the Ruppert household was not a haven but a hierarchy. His father, Leonard Sr., was a man of violent temper, ruling through fear. His mother, Charity, possessed a clear and damaging favoritism for her firstborn, Leonard Jr., a bright, confident boy who embodied her aspirations. James, from his earliest memories, occupied the role of the unwanted afterthought. Anecdotes from his childhood are stark in their cruelty. Charity reportedly told her younger son she had wished for a daughter in his place, a foundational rejection that carved a deep void of self-worth. This emotional neglect had physical manifestations. Despite young James developing a severe allergy to feathers, his father insisted on keeping chickens, and his distress was dismissed. His childhood was a masterclass in inferiority, where his very existence was framed as a disappointment next to his brother's exemplary path. This established a lifelong narrative for James. He was secondary, defective, and fundamentally unlovable. The stage was set not for a bond of brotherhood, but for a slow-burning rivalry defined by neglect and scorn, creating a psyche where resentment could take root and grow wild in the shadow of another son. The death of Leonard Sr. from tuberculosis in 1947 did not bring James relief. Instead, it cemented his trapped status. At 12, he lost a feared patriarch only to see his older brother, Leonard Jr., assume a similar role of dominance. The bullying continued, now without a buffer. Isolated at school and tormented at home, James found no sanctuary. His academic performance suffered, a reflection of his internal turmoil. The cumulative weight of this existence became unbearable by his 16th year. In a desperate act, James took sheets from his home and attempted to hang himself. The attempt failed, but the act itself was a critical turning point. It was as if, having tried and failed to escape his pain, he resigned himself to it entirely. He stopped striving, fully internalizing the identity of the inferior son. This surrender colored his entire future. His subsequent attempts at college lasted only 2 years, ending in withdrawal. Meanwhile, Leonard Jr. flourished, earning an engineering degree, a tangible symbol of everything James was not. The final, deeply personal blow came when Leonard Jr. married a woman named Alma, who had once been James's girlfriend. This was not merely a romantic loss. To James, it was the ultimate theft, a conclusive demonstration that his brother would always take what little he had. By his 40s, James was a spectral figure in his mother's home, unemployed, financially dependent, and defined by a profound, all-consuming sense of failure. The early 1970s applied the final, intolerable pressures on James Ruppert's fragile world. His modest savings were wiped out in the stock market crash of 1973 to 74, erasing any semblance of financial independence. His mother, Charity, now in her 70s and likely exhausted by supporting her middle-aged son, delivered an ultimatum: find a job and start paying rent or leave her home. Her reported words that if he could afford alcohol, he could afford rent, cut to the core of his shame. The threat of eviction was catastrophic. It meant not just homelessness, but the absolute revocation of his last claim to security, however miserable. This external pressure interacted violently with his internal pathologies. His ritual of heavy drinking intensified, a futile anesthetic for his humiliation. Parallel to this was his growing fascination with firearms. He accumulated a small arsenal, a .357 Magnum, 2.22 caliber handguns, and a .22 rifle. Target practice became a focused outlet, a domain where he could exert control and precision absent from every other facet of his life. In the days before Easter, 1975, his behavior took on a more urgent quality. He visited a gun shop and specifically inquired about purchasing a silencer, though he did not buy one. The question itself entered the record. On his 41st birthday, March 29th, he was seen at the Great Miami River engaged in prolonged target shooting. Every element of his existence was converging: the financial despair, the maternal threat, the lifetime of humiliation, and the readily available tools of violence. Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975, dawned with routine normalcy for the extended Ruppert family. Because Charity was feeling unwell, the holiday dinner was shifted to her home at 635 Minor Avenue. Leonard Jr., Alma, and their 8 children, Leonard III, 17, Michael, 16, Thomas, 15, Carol, 13, Anne, 12, David, 11, Teresa, 9, and John, 4, arrived for an afternoon of celebration. The scene was idyllic. Children hunted for Easter eggs in the yard. Laughter filled the air, and the comforting aroma of a meal being prepared wafted from the kitchen. James, reportedly suffering from a hangover, slept through much of the early activity. When he finally emerged in the late afternoon, he was an outsider looking in on a tableau of familial warmth from which he felt perpetually excluded. He interacted briefly before announcing he was going to a shooting range. It was a plausible statement, consistent with his known habits. As he prepared to leave, an innocuous moment occurred that would become the infamous trigger. His brother, Leonard Jr., asked him about the condition of his Volkswagen. The comment was likely casual, but in James's mind, filtered through decades of perceived slights, it resonated as a patronizing jab about his failures. His unreliable car, a symbol of his unstable life. At that precise moment, the path of the evening fractured. James did not walk out the front door toward his car. He turned and went back upstairs. What happened next was an eruption of methodical horror. James retrieved his weapons. He did not proceed to the shooting range. He walked into the kitchen where his mother, Alma, and 3 of the children, David, Teresa, and Carol, were gathered. Without warning, he opened fire. Charity, in a final, futile act of maternal protection, lunged at him. He shot her in the head. He then moved into the living room where the rest of the family was assembled. The shooting was rapid, disciplined, and thorough. He used multiple weapons, firing a total of 44 rounds. 40 found human targets. Crucially, the timing coincided with the evening peal of church bells from a nearby congregation, their ringing drowning out the sounds of gunfire for neighbors. When the initial volley was complete, James did not flee. He moved through the 2 blood-soaked rooms. He observed the moans and movements of those still clinging to life. He then executed coup de grace shots to the head, ensuring every member of his family was dead. The entire event, from the first shot to the last, took less than 5 minutes. In that brief, unimaginable span, James Ruppert erased his entire bloodline, transforming a home of holiday celebration into a charnel house. The violence was not a blind frenzy. It was shockingly efficient, a grim perversion of the target shooting skills he had honed for years. In the devastating silence that followed the gunshots, James Ruppert did not call for help. He did not attempt to flee. He simply sat down. For 3 hours, he remained in the house, seated amidst the bodies of his mother, his brother, his sister-in-law, and his 8 nieces and nephews. Investigators and psychologists would later grapple with this chilling interlude. Ruppert himself would state that he considered suicide but refrained, believing it to be a mortal sin he did not want as his final act. This 3-hour vigil is one of the case's most haunting elements. It was a period of eerie passivity following an explosion of extreme action. Was it a state of psychological dissociation, a mind shutting down after committing the unthinkable? Was it a calculated pause, allowing time for any potential witnesses to the noise to settle before he made his next move? Or was it a twisted form of communion, a final, silent sharing of space with the family from whom he had always felt alienated, now forcing a terrible, permanent proximity? Finally, at approximately 9 p.m., he broke the silence. He walked to the telephone and dialed the police. His statement to the dispatcher was flat and devoid of emotion. "There's been a shooting." He gave the address and waited for the authorities to arrive, a passive participant in the discovery of his own handiwork. The police officers who responded to 635 Minor Avenue were first greeted by James Ruppert himself at the front door. His appearance, a slight, bespectacled, unassuming man, belied the scene within. He offered no resistance. It was only upon entering the home that the sheer scale of the atrocity became horrifyingly clear. One veteran officer would later recount that the carnage was so severe, he was forced to retreat outside to vomit. The house was a portrait of abrupt, terminal violence. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle. An overturned trash can was the only evidence of disruption. The volume of blood was so immense it had seeped through the floorboards and was dripping into the basement below. The victims lay where they had fallen, in the kitchen and living room. The community of Hamilton was paralyzed with shock. The Rupperts were known as a solid, respectable family. Leonard Jr. was a successful engineer. That such brutality could emerge from within this seemingly normal home, perpetrated by the quiet man who lived with his mother, shattered any sense of local security. As the grim procession of 11 covered stretchers was carried out over the hours that followed, a collective trauma settled over the city. James Ruppert was booked on 11 counts of aggravated murder. He exercised his right to remain silent, offering no explanation, beginning a legal strategy that would unfold over years. James Ruppert's defense, led by attorney Hugh Holbrook, was unambiguous. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Holbrook invested personal funds to assemble a team of psychiatrists who constructed a psychological profile of a man pushed beyond reason. They diagnosed Ruppert with severe paranoid personality disorder and delusions of persecution, directly stemming from the lifelong abuse and bullying by his brother and rejection by his mother. Their argument was that on Easter Sunday, this condition erupted in a psychotic rage, a break from reality where he could not control his actions or comprehend their criminality. They painted him as a ultimate product of familial cruelty, his mind snapping under a weight it had borne for decades. The prosecution, led by John Holcomb, presented a diametrically opposed theory, one of cold, calculated murder for financial gain. Holcomb meticulously laid out the circumstantial evidence of planning, the silencer inquiry, the targeted practice, the timing with the church bells. He focused on the motive, an inheritance worth approximately $300,000 from his mother and brother. If found sane and guilty of murder, Ruppert could not inherit. If found insane, he would be committed to a mental hospital where he could later be declared sane and released to claim the money. The trial became a clash of narratives. Was this the tragic endpoint of a broken psyche, or was it a ruthless, premeditated financial scheme disguised as madness? The jury was asked to decide not just what Ruppert did, but who he was at the moment he did. The legal journey of Ohio versus James Ruppert was as convoluted as the crime was stark. His first trial in 1975 was decided by a 3-judge panel, 2 of whom found him sane and convicted him, sentencing him to 11 consecutive life terms. A mistrial was declared due to procedural confusion. A second trial in Findlay, Ohio, ended with the same result. But in 1982, a third trial produced a verdict that reflected the profound ambiguity of the case. The jury found James Ruppert not guilty by reason of insanity for the murders of his sister-in-law Alma and the 8 children. However, for the murders of his brother and mother, the 2 figures at the center of his lifelong grievances, they found him guilty. This split decision was legally puzzling and emotionally unsatisfying to many. It suggested the jury believed his rage against his immediate tormentors was somehow more rational or more culpable than the killing of the others, who were arguably collateral victims. The verdict stood. Ruppert was sentenced to life imprisonment for the 2 murders, with the insanity finding for the others, ensuring he would be held within the state's prison system indefinitely. The courts had spoken, but a definitive answer to the core question of motive and mental state remained elusive, sealed within Ruppert's own stubborn silence. James Ruppert spent 47 years in the Ohio prison system, dying of natural causes at age 88 in 2022. He was repeatedly denied parole, with boards citing his poor institutional conduct and the enduring, vehement opposition from the Hamilton community. The house on Minor Avenue changed hands. Subsequent tenants reported unexplained phenomena and did not stay long. The story endured, dissected in true crime forms, and culminating in a book by prosecutor John Holcomb's daughter-in-law. The Easter Sunday Massacre endures as a dark American parable. It forces us to confront the terrifying potential of sustained emotional violence within a family and the lethal intersection of resentment, access to weapons, and a final, perceived insult. It asks whether a lifetime of being told you are nothing can ultimately justify making others nothing in return. The evidence allows for 2 compelling, parallel truths. James Ruppert was indeed a profoundly damaged man, a casualty of relentless familial neglect. James Ruppert was also a man who, whether in a moment of psychosis or calculation, made a conscious choice to arm himself, to shoot, to reload, and to execute. In the end, the most haunting question is not which truth we choose to believe, but how both could coexist in one quiet man on a spring evening, leaving a legacy of blood in a mystery that forever resists a clean resolution.